What do I play today on the Retro Hunting Adventures? I got all these Atari games, some PlayStation Portable games, some Game Boy games. Yeah, that's the ticket. Today we're going to talk about 5 Japanese Game Boy games you can play without knowing Japanese. This is the Retro Hunting Adventures. Stay tuned for more after these words from MegaManFan.
Yo, this is MegaManFan, and you need to rock and or roll on over to Mr. MegaManFan's YouTube channel, because it's all that rush to make it happen. Peace!
The Retro Hunting Adventures is back with your host, Mr. MegaManFan, and thank you for being here for another week. I went through my entire case of Japanese Game Boy games, whittled it down to a handful that I thought would make sense without knowing Japanese, and I had to narrow it down to just 5 out of this set. I decided to disqualify Boomer's Adventures in Asmic World because that's easily available here in the United States. I also decided to disqualify Mole Mania, as I talked about that in a recent pickups video, so I thought there was no need to go over it twice. That narrows it down a little bit, but I think we can eliminate one more. Super Chinese Land. I feel like that qualifies for a whole video in and of itself because there are a whole bunch of Super Chinese Land games. And in the end, I eliminated Godzilla 2 because Angry Video Game Nerd has covered that one extensively, so for today I'd rather focus on things that are less talked about or less well known. Mario's P-Cross was probably the exception to that rule, but I find it a useful one because the value of it has gone up significantly, but it is very cheap in Japan by comparison because this series was much more popular there. So we'll go with all of the ones you see here, except for Godzilla. And just so we're clear here from the start, the point is that these games are accessible because of the gameplay, regardless of what country you're in. So you could play them in the United States, Europe, South Africa, Denmark. It doesn't matter. It's not a judgment on the fact of whether or not you should know Japanese, because it's a wonderful language. I would encourage anybody to study it and learn it. The point is, the gameplay translates without a translation. That's what I'm getting across to you by focusing on these 5 games. And Dharma Brothers is a great example of that because this is a very simple to understand game. All you have to do is match up the blocks on either the left or the right side with the row that the monster is standing on. When you do, he falls down to the row underneath. You want him to go all the way to the bottom row. If you shove a block in, he can jump up on that and climb higher, and he's trying to get to the girl at the top. So at all costs, you need to keep him from doing that. Match up the blocks, either horizontally or vertically. When they're the same color, they will disappear when they're matched together, and you can keep matching those blocks until he sinks to the bottom, at which point he falls over, you win the level, and you get a time bonus based on how quickly you were able to do it. As you progress from one level to the next, they up difficulty by putting more monsters on the screen, so you can't just focus on one, because then the other might escape and get to the top. You have to keep working on each one from both sides, as there are more of them to deal with. So Dharma Brothers is a game that, even though it never got released outside of Japan, very easy to pick up, very easy to play, and at the time I bought it, it was very inexpensive, only $1 or so before shipping. Now obviously, COVID-19 has made shipping from Japan a lot more expensive, but if you do a combined order and pick a bunch of games that are inexpensive and fun to play, you can maximize the value of what you pay for shipping and get some good imports for much less than you would pay for comparable Game Boy games in North America. It can be done. And here we have Mario's P-Cross, a game that did get a North American release, but did very poorly in this market, and as a result, the sequels to the game came out exclusively in Japan, and the series itself stayed exclusive to Japan until I'd say 2007 is when I believe the Nintendo DS Mario's P-Cross game came out here. Why this didn't take off? It's hard to say. Maybe there's something about it that didn't culturally cross over, but cross is actually a great word to start with here because it's a picture meets a crossword, hence P-cross. What you're doing is filling in a grid with either black spots to indicate that nothing's there, or X's to indicate that something is there. And the numbers that you see across the top and to the left tell you how many of each you can expect. For example, the 5s at the top in this demo show you that there were 5 black spaces in those columns. So if you were playing it, you could fill those in immediately, and then you have to guess where the rest of the blanks and the tiles go. It's not going to give you an exact location, but it's like a Minesweeper in that you can guess based on the clues that you're given around you as to where things would be. And if you guess wrong, you get punished, as you'll see here in a moment. I'm going to use the preset puzzles to demonstrate the gameplay to you, and at the beginning, you get a random row and column combination. It cycles around until you hit a button, and then it stops on that specific space. So you get a little bonus to start you out with to help you fill things in. Again, I already know that I can fill in all the black spaces on the columns that have 5 at the top. There won't be any X's in those particular areas. That can whittle down the board very quickly for you, and then after that, you have to figure out where everything else belongs. But when you make a mistake, you get penalized on your time, which ticks down from 30 minutes. Not that any of these puzzles would take you 30 minutes, but you get a bonus based on how quickly you solve puzzles, so you don't want to make mistakes and lose a bunch of time, because the more time that you have left, the better your score will be. And once you have filled in all the available spaces until nothing's left but the picture you're trying to form, the game will at that point say that the puzzle is solved and then show you what it looks like. It will pull up the image in its black and white colors and show you how it looks in the block, whatever that particular shape that you made is. Maybe that's just not exciting enough for certain gamers who really want action. But I feel like Jeremy Parrish has discussed this before, and one of the things he says about Game Boy is that it does puzzle games very well, arcade games and action games not quite as well, role-playing games somewhere in the middle between those two. So a puzzle game is perfectly suited for the monochromatic colors of the original Game Boy. And if you give yourself a chance, a game like Mario P-Cross is super fun to play. It just never took off in North America, which now makes the game much more desirable and collectible because it sold poorly and there aren't many copies of it around. So if you really want to play this game, I'd say do it in emulation or import a copy, because paying the full price for the North American copy compared to how cheap it is as an import, again, if you package together your imports, buy from one seller and get multiple games at a time, you can maximize that shipping and really get your money's worth. Now, I can't say that Proteus is necessarily a cheap import. In fact, I got lucky with this one. I bought a lot of 20 to 30 Game Boy games, and this one just happened to be one of the games in the lot, and I paid about $1 each for all of those games, so I made out like a bandit when I saw Proteus in there. I was extremely happy about that. This series did get some love in Europe, and I suppose you could just import a European copy, but I don't think the print runs were that big, and the language difference is non-existent because it's a shoot 'em up and it's a parody of Gradius, hence Proteus. They let you use ships from multiple different Konami games. You don't have to go with a Vic Viper if you don't want to, but I prefer to because it just feels good to me to play this game with these silly characters and the Vic Viper. And you can see that the bells from the Twinbee series are also in here because Konami is just freely mixing together elements from multiple different shooters and giving you one fun experience. I really wish they had tried to make the Proteus series a thing here, but they never did. And so, as a result, if you want to play the Proteus games, you are going to pay a premium to import them from Japan. The Game Boy game, not the most expensive of them, but it goes up from there, especially when you get into the Super Famicom titles. Some of those go for a hefty amount. Worth it to try an emulation first, because if you don't want something that makes fun of Gradius, or if you're not a fan of shoot 'em ups or Konami games in general, perhaps the whole idea of a parody of Gradius or any of their other shoot 'em ups just isn't your thing. But again, I got lucky on this one. It was in a lot of about 30 games, and since they were $1 a piece, I consider that a very good value. If you can get it for under $10, I would think you could get well more than $10 of gameplay out of it if you like shoot 'em ups. I'm not showing it off very well. I'm doing poorly in this session, but trust me, I come back and play this one quite a bit. I can't, however, say the same thing for Puyo Puyo, and I love the Puyo Puyo series. I play these games quite a bit. Puzzle games are really my jam, but this one has some difficulty that's built in, not because of the language, but because of the Game Boy's limited color palette, so they had to use different shapes instead of different colors to tell you which Puyo pieces you're matching together. And that really screws with my brain when I'm expecting colors, because I've played so many other Puyo games on PlayStation and Nintendo, and it just doesn't register for me. And I end up not making good matches or stacking up good chains of matches together because I'm so used to the colors as opposed to the shapes. It's a good workaround. I applaud Compile for the effort. They did what they could to make a Game Boy game out of Puyo Puyo, but I can also see why they didn't decide to localize this for North America. It's not because there's a language barrier, it's because it really isn't that much fun compared to other Puyo Puyo games, and I don't think it would have sold very well. It just moves too slowly. It doesn't have the frantic action of the colors lining up easily to form huge chains that you love when you play Puyo Puyo games, when you smash those blocks together and send the garbage to the other side of the screen and make your enemies suffer. Maybe, and this is a huge maybe because I don't know this for a fact, you can play this with a Game Boy link cable and get some of that joy back, but then that would require you to import 2 copies, or if you're doing it with an emulator, find some way to do a Game Link cable over the internet. I've got to assume that's a possibility. Through emulation you could emulate the Game Link, but I've never actually tried to do that. The bottom line is, just because all 5 of the Game Boy games from Japan that I'm showing you today are playable without knowing Japanese intimately, doesn't mean that all 5 of them are stellar games. It just means that if you're looking for imports you can play, or ones that you can try in emulation without already knowing Japanese, these are 5 good games to start with. They're not all equally fun, but they're all equally accessible to the non-Japanese reader. And finally, going back to Konami again, we have the aforementioned Twinbee, which was one of the selectable characters in Proteus. The Twinbee series got its start on Famicom, and recently got a little more love thanks to the fact the game was featured in Nintendo's Switch Online service. So if you've never played the original Twinbee, you can always start there if you have Switch Online, or you can play it here on the Game Boy, or as mentioned via emulation. But however you play it, it is a very fun, vertically scrolling shoot 'em up where you juggle bells, and each time you juggle them by shooting them, they change to a different power-up or a different point bonus. So it combines multiple things. You have to use strategy to get the bell that you want, and you have to keep track of the enemies on the screen, both the ones that are in front of you that you shoot down, and the ones on the ground that are firing at you that you have to use the other button to throw bombs at. So there's lots to measure and deal with as you're trying to play a Twinbee game, or at least these particular Twinbee games. There are derivatives that actually do something other than vertically scrolling shoot 'em ups, but those aren't the main focus of the Twinbee series. And to this day, it still amazes me that Twinbee on both the Game Boy and the Famicom didn't get any kind of port to North America. Maybe they thought the game was just too cute for Western audiences. There is a somewhat cutesy aesthetic to it, but I wouldn't go so far as to call Twinbee a cute 'em up. Maybe they thought the bell juggling gimmick was too complicated for a Western gamer. I don't necessarily think that it is. In fact, I would say out of all the games in the Switch Online service, if you've never played Twinbee before, you should definitely start with that. And again, as with Proteus, the Konami shoot 'em up games, especially the ones that never came out here, have some extra value as imports. So don't assume this will be the cheapest game you can get, but I bought a copy with a somewhat mangled label that didn't look perfect, and I spent around $8 for it, and it plays just as well as a perfect looking copy would. So sometimes you can save money just by choosing things that are cosmetically less than ideal, but the gameplay is exactly the same. I'm Mr. MegaManFan. Thank you for watching.